Hello philosophers, Ollie here. The question that I get the most often from all the lovely fan mail that you send me, and I think I get this question about once a week now, is can I recommend any books for you to read? And my answer is always, well, it kind of depends on what you're into, really. But I thought it might be fun to go through the last few books that I've read and tell you a little bit about them so that you can get a flavour for what I've been reading and maybe pick up some things for your New Year's reading list. So the most recent thing I read was Paul Mason's book, Postcapitalism. It was a Christmas present from my girlfriend and I loved it. It's economics and also philosophy and a bit of history and a bit of computer science as well. It's really quite wide-ranging and interesting. Mason goes through the history of capitalism and socialism and what their strengths and weaknesses are, where they came from, the financial crisis, the most recent one, and also the collapse of the Soviet Union, and talks about where they might be going in the future with the rise of information technology changing them, and what the future of economics might be, and therefore what the future of everything might be, when capitalism and socialism are challenged by things like the refugee crisis and the looming environmental catastrophe and aging populations. So it's really, really relevant and really, really informative as well. It's a fairly easy read, it doesn't get too technical, and I think that wherever you are on the political economic spectrum, whether you're like a hardcore right-wing Randian anarcho-capitalist or whether you're a full-on left-wing socialist, it's going to have some challenges for you in there and some things to think about and interesting questions to ask yourself. I did a thing on Twitter where I went through the main theoretical points and had a bit of a whistle-stop tour of it. So I'll put a link to that list of tweets in the description. So if you're thinking about getting it, you can get a bit more of a flavour for it. Also, hopefully, Paul Mason himself might be helping me turn it into an episode of the show at some point in the future. I've reached out to him about that. So fingers crossed, do keep your eyes out for that. The book I read before that was Casting Out by Sherene Razack. The full title is Casting Out: The Evictions of Muslims from Western Law and Politics. This one was really, really interesting. I'm getting quite into my post-colonial philosophy recently. Razack talks about the racialization of Muslims in Western societies and the way Muslims have been treated in the West since 9/11 and the philosophical and theoretical underpinnings of that. And she gets quite into detail at points. Sometimes she talks about the nitty-gritty of individual legal cases, and sometimes she's looking at slightly more broader phenomena. She also criticises some feminist writers for the way they have responded to patriarchal violence in conservative Islam, and that was a really, really interesting chapter. It's really super relevant, and again, I did a little thing about it that you can read. I'll put a link to that in the description so you can get more of an idea of it. And again, this is going to be an episode of the show. This is going to be part of a double episode, which is hopefully going to be ready really, really soon. I'm really, really excited about that because it is super interesting. Sticking with the post-colonial philosophy theme, the book I read before that was Falguni, Sheth, Toward a Political Philosophy of Race. This one was so amazing. It's been a long time since I've finished a book and then immediately turned back to the start and started reading it again, but I really wanted to make sure I understood all the points because she really crams a lot into those 180 pages. It's about the concept of race and how it's used in politics and law. So you might be aware that there's a debate over whether race is a series of biological categories or whether race is just like socially constructed by people. And she has a very, very, very interesting view on that. And she says it's actually kind of neither. She also has a discussion on Islam. She devotes a chapter to it, and in particular the veil and how women wearing veils is seen in the West and what that means for our political and legal systems. This is going to be the other half of that double episode that I've just been talking about, so it's going to be really cool. This is going to be on the show, and Professor Sheth has actually helped me with the script for that episode, so I'm super excited about that. Hopefully that's going to be on the show soon. I mean, I've got the script and I'm happy with them. There's just a few more things, kind of behind the scenes, YouTube-y things that I want to try and make happen with that. So yeah, you're going to be hearing about this soon, and it's really, really interesting. The next one's a bit of a wild card. I'm afraid I don't have it to show you because I lent it to my girlfriend and she's taken it back to America. But it's called Whipping Girl by Julia Serano. The full title is Whipping Girl, a transgender woman on sexism and the scapegoating of femininity. Julia Serano is, I think she has a PhD in biochemistry and molecular biophysics, I think. She's also a trans woman. And I thought that my reading list wasn't especially diverse. I hadn't read any long books by trans people, and I thought it might be good to diversify my reading a little bit. That's always a healthy habit to get into. And it was really, really cool. It's really interesting. Again, nice, easy read. Some bits are philosophy and some bits are almost media studies, I guess. The bits that I found the most interesting were where she goes through transphobic tropes that are used in the media and talks about exactly why they're harmful and what they imply and what they mean. I thought that was really, really interesting. Now that trans people are getting more visibility in the media with things like The Danish Girl, it's good to be able to look out for things like that. She also has a really cool critique of gender performativism. So you might have heard of that theory. It's the idea that your gender identity is like a performance that you do at all times. It's not something that you're born with or something that's ingrained in you. And she has a really, really interesting critique of that. She devotes a chapter to it and how her experiences as a trans woman challenge the idea of gender performativism and show what its limits are. Again, she criticises some feminist writers as well, including Germaine Greer, specifically on their exclusion of trans women from women's spaces. So yeah, it's a really, really interesting book, really wide-ranging, and there's a lot to be getting on with in that book, so I really thoroughly recommend that one. The next one on the list is one that I read a while ago, but it's still really, really interesting and really relevant to me. Again, I'm afraid I don't have it to show you because I lent it to my brother, but it's called What Terrorists Want by Louise Richardson. Louise is an absolutely lovely lady. She was the principal of my university when I was an undergrad, and she's also, I think, just become the first Vice-Chancellor of the University of Oxford, which is really cool. She is one of the world's foremost experts on terrorism, and the title of the book more or less tells you what it's about. It's a study of terrorism and why people do it with a view to understanding how we can tackle it and prevent it as well. So that's really interesting. She has personally interviewed and known a lot of terrorists in her life, and she really offers a fascinating insight into it. She examines terrorism, both ancient and modern, and both religious and secular as well. And she devotes a whole chapter to what changed in terms of terrorism after 9/11 and what didn't change and what the response to that was and what terrorist challenges we might be facing in the West in the future. So I really do absolutely recommend that one. It's sadly still very, very relevant today, but it's a really fascinating look at it. And last but not least, Das Kapital. Now, don't go reading anything about my political views into the fact that Karl Marx is on my reading list. The reason I picked Marx up is because I hadn't really read much Marx at university, which surprised me when I realised it. I didn't study a lot of political philosophy when I was at uni. I just chose different modules, and Marx didn't appear on my reading list all that much. So I thought, since he's one of the most famous philosophers in the world, I should really get to grips with him and give him a go. And I really got a lot out of it. Das Kapital is one of the most famous books he ever wrote, one of the most famous books anybody ever wrote, arguably. And it really does have some interesting stuff in there. For about the first 150 pages, it can get quite dry, it's quite technical economics. But then it suddenly gets absolutely fascinating and really, really exciting when he says, okay, let's take everything we've learned so far and we'll apply it to the state of 19th century England. And he has all these very vivid, very passionate descriptions of the factory conditions and the people and the children that were being forced to work in the factories. And he quotes factory inspectors at great length a lot of the time as well, and talks about all the things they encountered and uses all the theory he's laid out to explain how those conditions arose, which is really quite fascinating, and loads of it's still really relevant today. I found myself reading bits of it going, oh wow, I've seen this happening, I've seen people talking about that, I've seen that on the news. So anybody who just consigns Marx to the dustbin of history is, I think, missing out, because there's a lot of really good stuff in there. It's surprisingly funny at times as well. Some bits are absolutely laugh out loud because he can get quite sassy and quite sarcastic when he's criticising other people, and when he's in particular criticising the work of other philosophers and economists like John Stuart Mill and Adam Smith. It can be quite a challenging read at times. He does like to slip into snippets of French or German or Latin at times, or make a little reference to Shakespeare, and it takes a while to get used to his style. It's definitely the hardest book on this list. But I think if you have the time for it, and if it's a book that you've been saying, oh, I need to get around to reading that, then do push yourself, because it is worth it and it is interesting. So those are my 6 recommendations from books that I've been reading recently. I hope they're informative for you and give you some interesting stuff to think about. If you've got any books that you think I should add to my extremely long reading list that I have in my phone here, then do let me know. Leave me a comment telling me about them. Don't forget to read often and read widely. And for more philosophical videos from me every Friday, please subscribe.